Let's dive right into this explainer, covering the chilling story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. Today, we're unraveling a terrifying mystery from 1922 Germany, and honestly, it is a case where the line between an overactive imagination and pure psychological horror just completely vanishes. I mean, imagine being trapped in your own home, absolutely terrified of these heavy, dragging footsteps you keep hearing directly above you in the attic. You tell your family, but they just brush it off. They say, oh, it's just rats, or it's just the wind. But then, physical evidence starts showing up. We're looking at a case so deeply twisted that police eventually concluded the killer wasn't just breaking in, they were literally already living inside the walls.
Picture this scenario for a second. You wake up at your isolated farmhouse right after a heavy winter snowstorm. You step outside, the air is totally freezing, and you look down. There, in the pristine, fresh snow, you find tracks. Boot prints leading directly from the dark tree line of the forest straight up to your front door. You trace them with your eyes, fully expecting to see where this trespasser went next, right? But then it hits you. There are no tracks leading away. This specific, spine-chilling discovery marked the beginning of the absolute most terrifying unsolved case in German history. Someone walked into that house, and they never walked out.
Part 1. The Isolated Farmstead.
To really understand how this builds, we first need to look at exactly who lived on this remote Bavarian farm. The setting is this dense, dark forest situated right between Munich and Ingolstadt. And when I say isolated, I mean really isolated. The Gruber family lived over a full kilometer away from their closest neighbor. The household was made up of the widowed father, Andreas. He lived there with his adult daughter, Victoria, and her two young children, Kazilia and Josef. They also employed a maid named Maria. And it's important to note, the family was already dealing with a pretty profound tragedy. Just 6 months prior, Victoria's husband had been killed fighting in World War I, leaving her as a young widow trying to manage life on this incredibly lonely farmstead.
Now, beneath the surface of this quiet, grieving family, the local village was just completely rife with whispers. The rumor circulating among the locals was that Victoria was actually involved in a secret, incestuous affair with her own father, Andreas. Some of the whispers even suggested a really dark, abusive relationship. Now, as impartial observers trying to figure out this historical case, we don't know for sure if these rumors were entirely factual. But this scandalous detail, it becomes a totally crucial puzzle piece later on when investigators start searching for motives. Was it the whole reason for the murders, or was it just a deadly red herring?
Part 2. Whispers in the Attic.
What's really wild about this is how the house itself almost began to warn the family of the impending danger. In the weeks leading up to the murders, the family actually complained to their neighbors about hearing strange things. We're talking heavy, dragging footsteps echoing from the attic at night. Then, in the days right before the event, they heard strange, muffled whispers echoing down through the chimney. Andreas, the father, he just brushed it off as rats. But then came March 31st. That was the morning they discovered those one-way footprints in the fresh snow. Maria, the maid, was so absolutely terrified by the realization that someone was actually hiding in the home, she quit on the exact spot. She flat out refused to spend another night under that roof. But, tragically, Andres managed to convince her to stay for just one last night until he could find a replacement.
Part 3. 3 Days of Terror.
So before poor Maria could leave the next morning, her absolute worst fears were realized. The killer finally stepped out of the shadows on the night of March 31st, right around 11:30 p.m. And the sequence of events here is incredibly grim. Somehow the killer lured the victims, Andreas, Victoria, the maid, and the children, out into the barn, one by one. Out there, they were brutally bludgeoned to death using a mattock, which, if you don't know, is this really heavy tool used for chopping wood. When investigators later conducted autopsies, they uncovered a deeply chilling, calculated detail. The children were actually struck again after they were already dead. This suggested to police that the killer wasn't just acting out of some blind, chaotic rage, but rather this methodical desire to ensure there were absolutely no survivors left behind.
And this right here perfectly illustrates the true, horrifying twist of the Hinterkaifeck case. You would think, right, that after committing such an awful atrocity, the killer would just flee into the night. But they didn't run. Instead, they essentially moved in. Inside the home, completely mundane domestic chores just continued. The hearth fire was kept burning, dishes were washed and put away, meals were cooked in the kitchen, the cows were milked, and the horses were fed. Meanwhile, literally just feet away, lay this grim reality. 6 bodies rotting in the barn. The physical evidence completely clashes with the psychological terror of it all. The killer basically domesticated themselves in a slaughterhouse.
They kept this bizarre, macabre routine up for 3 whole days before the police finally arrived on April 4th. 3 days. During that time, a neighbor actually noticed chimney smoke rising from the house. He walked right up to the front door and knocked, wondering why the farm was so suspiciously quiet. And inside, the killer simply stayed perfectly still, watching that neighbor right through the window blinds, just waiting for him to give up and walk away.
Part 4. Suspects and Sinister Theories. So the obvious, crucial question is, who on earth was this person hiding in the walls? Who was capable of executing an entire family and then calmly feeding their cattle the very next morning? The police were entirely baffled, but they did have a few working theories. Initially, the leading suspect was a drifter named Carl, who was a known thief in the area. But, despite having a pretty clear motive for robbery, he ended up having an airtight alibi. So suspicion then shifted to the neighbor who actually found the bodies, because he had a known, bitter rivalry with the father, Andreas. But honestly, the most sinister theory of all ties right back to that village rumor we discussed earlier. Some investigators believe Victoria was murdered by a man who knew she was a victim of abuse, someone who was exacting a totally twisted form of vigilante justice. Whoever it was, the evidence points undeniably to someone who possessed an intimate, detailed knowledge of the farm's layout, someone who had been hiding up in that freezing attic for weeks before the blizzard, watching the family sleep, observing their daily routines, and just waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike.
To this very day, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain completely unsolved. The animals were fed, the fire was lit, the killer walked in, but they never walked out. It leaves us with a real lingering sense of dread as we wrap up this explainer. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the Gruber family on that freezing March morning. If you were standing out there in the snow, staring down at those footprints going straight into your home but not coming out, would you have opened that door? Keep questioning what might be hiding in the shadows.